It was late afternoon, the kind of day that felt lazy and peaceful. The sun hung low over the quiet streets, washing everything in a golden glow. A soft breeze moved through the trees, and kids' laughter echoed faintly from a nearby park. It seemed like nothing could go wrong that day. A 17-year-old boy drove home from basketball practice, still wearing his team hoodie, sweat drying on his forehead. He loved the quiet after practice, the hum of his car, the music playing softly through the speakers, and the small sense of freedom he felt when driving alone. For him, it was a little taste of adulthood, of peace after long hours of school and training. He turned down a familiar road and noticed that his gas tank was nearly empty. He sighed, pulling into a small convenience store to grab a drink and fill up before heading home. The store was one of those local spots everyone stopped at, a little rundown but friendly, the kind of place where people greeted the cashier by name. He parked his car, grabbed his wallet, and headed inside. The cool air hit him as he opened the door, a relief from the late-day heat. He picked out a sports drink, paid, and walked back toward his car, scrolling through his phone. He didn't notice the patrol car parked across the street. Inside that patrol car sat two officers who had been told to be on alert for a stolen sedan reported in the area, a dark-colored vehicle, possibly driven by a young man. They spotted the boy's car and exchanged a quick look. It wasn't the same model as the stolen one, but something about how he moved, how he looked around before getting into the driver's seat, caught their attention. "Let's check him out," one of them said, as the boy got into his car and started to pull away. The police car slowly rolled out from across the street. The boy glanced in his mirror and noticed the patrol car behind him. He didn't think much of it at first. He knew his driving was fine. He wasn't speeding or breaking any rules. But after a few blocks, the car was still there. Following every turn, his heart started to race a little. He told himself to stay calm. His mother always said, "If you ever get stopped, stay polite, keep your hands visible, and do exactly as you're told." He remembered her words clearly. She was in law enforcement after all. She knew how fast things could go wrong. Then the red and blue lights flashed behind him. The boy's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He took a deep breath, pulled over to the side of the road, and parked. His chest rose and fell faster now. He looked into his rearview mirror, watching as two officers stepped out of their car. One of them rested a hand near his holster, and that sight made the boy's stomach twist. He rolled down his window, his hands shaking slightly. "License and registration," one officer said sharply. "Yes, sir," the boy replied quietly, keeping his eyes forward. He slowly reached for his wallet, moving deliberately so they could see his hands. "Where are you headed?" the second officer asked. "Just going home from practice," he answered, his voice unsteady. The first officer circled around his car, shining a flashlight into the back seat even though it was still daylight. "This your car?" "Yes, sir." "It's my mom's, actually." The officer frowned, stepping closer. "Mind stepping out of the vehicle for me?" The boy froze.
"Did I do something wrong?"
"Just step out of the car," the officer repeated, his tone harder this time. He unbuckled his seatbelt slowly and stepped outside, his hands raised slightly in front of him. His heart was pounding now, echoing in his ears. People were walking by on the sidewalk watching. He could feel their eyes on him, but no one said a word. The second officer began questioning him, where he lived, what he was doing in the area, who the car belonged to. Each answer he gave seemed to make them more suspicious instead of less. "You fit the description of a suspect," one of them said. "What suspect?" he asked softly. "Don't play smart. You know what we're talking about," the officer snapped. The boy didn't know what to say. He stood there, hands trembling, trying to stay calm. He thought of his mom, how she'd always said to keep his cool, to never argue. But he could feel the anger and fear mixing inside him like fire. One of the officers asked to search the car. He hesitated, saying it wasn't his car to give permission for. The officer took that as defiance. "Put your hands on the hood," the officer ordered. The boy obeyed instantly, pressing his palms against the warm metal. The street was quiet except for the sound of his heavy breathing. The second officer began checking the car while the first stood beside him, watching closely. When the officer leaned in to look through the car window, he spotted a gym bag on the back seat. "What's in there?" he demanded. "My basketball stuff," the boy said. "Open it." He started to reach for the zipper, but before he could, the officer's hand moved toward his holster again. "Stop right there. I'm just showing you the bag," he said, his voice cracking. "Keep your hands where I can see them." The officer barked. The boy froze, his heart hammering so loudly he could barely think. His throat felt dry. He wanted to cry, to scream, to call his mom, but he didn't dare move. At that moment, his phone, which was still in his car's cup holder, began to ring. The vibration startled the officer, who yelled again, "What's that sound?" "It's my phone," the boy said quickly. "It's just my phone." The officer moved to grab it through the open car window, snatching it before the boy could even explain. "Who's calling you?" "My mom," he said softly. The officer frowned but didn't answer. Across the street, a few people had started recording on their phones. A woman whispered to another, "He looks terrified." Someone else said, "He's just a kid." The officers didn't seem to care. The tension grew thicker with each passing second. The boy kept staring down at the ground, trying not to cry, trying not to move. He knew that one wrong gesture, one misunderstanding, could change everything. After a few minutes that felt like hours, one of the officers spoke into his radio. The boy couldn't hear what was said, but he could tell it wasn't good. He heard words like "possible suspect" and "bring backup." His chest tightened. He thought about his mom again, how she worked long hours protecting people, how proud he was of her. He wanted to believe that if she were here, none of this would be happening. But right now she wasn't. He was alone. The officer holding his phone glanced at the screen again. The caller ID flashed "Mom." The officer ignored it. The boy's eyes filled with tears he didn't want to show. He wasn't crying out of guilt or fear of punishment. He was crying because he felt powerless. Because no matter how polite he was, no matter how calm he tried to stay, it didn't seem to matter. A minute later, the officer's radio crackled again, and the boy heard a faint response. The first officer straightened, glancing down the road. "We'll wait here," he muttered. The boy didn't know what that meant. All he knew was that he wanted to go home, to see his mother's face, to feel safe again. A car passed by slowly, the driver lowering his window and shouting, "He didn't do anything!" But the officers ignored him. Then the boy noticed something in the distance, a black SUV turning the corner fast, moving toward them with purpose. He didn't know it yet, but that moment would change everything. Inside that SUV was his mother, driving with a focused, furious calm. She had just gotten the call from one of his friends who witnessed the stop. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as she tried to steady her breathing. Every instinct inside her screamed that something was wrong. Back at the scene, the boy stood beside his car, surrounded by flashing lights and curious onlookers. The sky was darkening now, the golden light fading into a dusky gray. He heard the faint hum of another car approaching quickly. The officers noticed it too. They glanced toward the street as the black SUV pulled up behind their patrol car. The door opened slowly. The boy couldn't see who it was at first, but then he recognized the familiar shape of his mother stepping out. His heart leapt. Relief washed over him, but so did worry. He knew how she got when she was angry, and she looked furious now. She walked toward them, calm but with fire in her eyes, her jacket still showing the small glint of her FBI badge clipped to her belt. The officers turned, one of them raising his hand and saying sharply, "Ma'am, please stay back." But she didn't stop walking. The boy didn't say a word. He just watched as his mother's steps grew slower, steadier, every inch of her showing power and control. The officers exchanged uncertain looks. Something about the way she moved made them pause. When she finally stopped just a few feet away, her voice was calm but commanding. "That's my son," she said. The air went still. Even the small crowd that had gathered fell silent. The officers blinked, unsure what to say. The boy's heart was still racing, but now, for the first time since it all began, he felt something else. Hope. The mother reached into her jacket slowly, pulled out her identification, and held it up. The gold letters on the badge caught the fading sunlight. Special Agent. The officers froze, and in that single moment, everything changed. The street fell silent the moment she spoke. The two officers froze, glancing between each other and the woman now standing a few steps from them. The boy could see the look on their faces change from control to confusion, from confidence to unease. His mother's calm tone carried more weight than a shout ever could. She walked closer, holding her badge so they could see it clearly. The late sun caught the gold of it, and one of the officers blinked as if unsure what he was seeing. "Special Agent Collins," she said again, her voice even but sharp. "That's my son. What's going on here?" The officer nearest to the boy straightened, lowering his hand from his belt. "Ma'am, we stopped him because She cut him off, still steady. "Because he what?" "Because he was driving home from practice." Her tone wasn't angry. It was controlled, measured, but behind it was something powerful. The kind of energy that filled the air before a storm breaks. The boy just stood still, too stunned to move. He had never seen his mother like this, not at home, not even when she talked about her job. She was calm but unshakable, every word carrying authority. The other officer cleared his throat, clearly nervous now. "We received a report about a stolen car, ma'am." The vehicle matched the description. She turned her gaze toward the car and then back to them. "Matched the description? This is a family car registered under my name. You could have checked that before pulling a minor out of it." The officer opened his mouth, but no words came. She stepped beside her son, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Did you tell them who you were driving home to?" she asked softly. He nodded, still shaken. "Yes, I said it was your car." Her jaw tightened. She looked back at the officers. "And you didn't believe him?" They exchanged glances, suddenly unsure how to respond. By now, more people had stopped to watch. Phones were still recording, and whispers moved through the small crowd. The quiet street had become a stage, and no one wanted to blink and miss what came next. One of the officers shifted uneasily. "We were just doing our job, ma'am." Her expression didn't change. "I know what your job is," she said calmly. "I've been doing mine for 20 years. The difference is I know how to do it without pointing suspicion at an innocent teenager." The boy looked up at her, pride and relief mixing with the fear that still clung to him. For a second he thought the officers might argue again, but they didn't. They stood there in silence, caught between embarrassment and regret. His mother turned slightly toward him. "Are you okay?" He nodded. "I'm fine." His voice was small but steady enough. She looked him over carefully as if making sure he really was unharmed. Then she turned back to the officers. "You had your weapons unholstered," she said quietly. "At a child, why?" The first officer started to speak but stopped when she lifted her hand slightly. "Don't answer," she said. "I'll be filing a report." "Both of your badge numbers, please." The officers hesitated. She stood waiting. Finally, they gave them to her. She typed them quickly into her phone, her movements calm, almost cold. One of the officers tried to explain again, his words stumbling. "Ma'am, we truly thought—" "You thought wrong," she said simply. "And thinking wrong is dangerous when you're holding authority and a gun." The street was silent again. Somewhere far off a siren wailed, then faded away. The boy's mother put her phone away and motioned for him to get back into the car. He obeyed, moving slowly, still shaken by how fast everything had spiraled. She walked around to the driver's side, opened the door, and looked back at the officers one last time. "You're lucky this ended with words," she said softly, because it could have ended much worse. For both sides. She got into the car, closed the door, and started the engine. The officers stepped aside, watching as the black SUV pulled away from the curb. The crowd began to scatter, murmuring to each other about what they had just seen. Inside the car, the boy sat silent, his hands resting in his lap. His mother's face was calm, but he could see her fingers gripping the steering wheel tightly. For several long minutes, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the rhythmic thump of the tires against the road. Finally, she said quietly, "You did the right thing." He turned to her, his voice small. "I tried to. I didn't argue or anything. I just did what you told me to do," she nodded. "That's what saved you." Her words hung in the air, heavy but true. He looked out the window, the world passing in blurs of color. "Mom," he said softly, "they thought I stole your car." Her jaw clenched. "They didn't think that," she said. "They assumed it." He didn't answer. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that carried understanding without needing words. After a few minutes, she sighed, her tone softening. "You know, I see things like this at work all the time. Reports, footage, complaints. But it feels different when it's your own child standing there." He glanced at her, unsure what to say. "You were really calm," he said. "Like really calm." A faint smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. You learn that with experience. Anger doesn't help. Precision does. They reached a stoplight and she finally let her grip on the wheel loosen. She looked at him and said quietly, "I need you to understand something. You did nothing wrong. Don't ever let this make you think you did." He nodded, but his chest still felt tight. When they got home, the sky was already turning dark. He carried his gym bag inside while she locked the car. The house, usually a place of warmth and noise, felt quieter than usual that evening. She put her bag down on the table, opened her laptop, and began typing. Her son watched her from the doorway. "Are you really going to report them?" he asked. "Of course," she said without looking up. "They need to answer for what happened. That's how things change." He hesitated. "Will they get fired?" She paused, hands still on the keyboard. "Maybe not. But they'll have to face what they did. Sometimes that's the first step." He nodded and sat down across from her. For a while, the only sound in the room was the clicking of keys. She was writing her report, every detail, every word exchanged, every gesture she noticed. Her training made her precise, but tonight her focus came from something deeper. It wasn't just about procedure. It was about her son. After a while, she stopped typing and looked up at him. "You know," she said softly, "when you were little, I used to think I could protect you from everything. But days like this remind me that I can't, not always." He lowered his eyes. "But you did," he said. "You showed up," she smiled faintly. "I'll always show up." Later that night, after she finished her report, she walked past his room and saw him sitting by the window, staring out at the quiet street. She knocked gently. "You should sleep," she said. "I can't," he admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I just see the lights. The way they looked at me." She sat down beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "It's okay to feel scared," she said softly. "It's not weakness. It's human." He nodded, still looking outside. "You think they'll ever stop seeing people like me that way?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes followed his, gazing into the night. "Change takes time," she said finally. "But we keep fighting for it. That's what matters." He leaned his head against her shoulder, and for a moment the world outside didn't feel as heavy. Down the street, the faint hum of a police car passed by again, its lights reflecting briefly across the window. He watched them fade away, feeling both fear and relief. His mother glanced at him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Tomorrow I'll take you to the station with me," she said quietly. "You'll see how we handle things from our side. Maybe it'll help you understand how to face people like that the right way." He looked up at her, surprised. "You mean it?" "Of course," she said. "If you're old enough to face what you did today, you're old enough to see how to change it." He smiled faintly, the first real smile since that afternoon. As the night deepened, she stayed with him a little longer, talking softly about small things, school, basketball, the funny neighbor who always borrowed their mail by mistake. Bit by bit, the heaviness lifted. Before she left his room, she looked back once more. "No matter what happens," she said, "don't ever let someone else's fear make you doubt who you are." He nodded, his voice quiet. "I won't." She turned off the light and walked down the hall, her footsteps soft against the floor. In the darkness, he sat for a while longer, thinking about everything that had happened, the flashing lights, the fear. And then the moment his mother stepped out of that car, it was the moment everything changed. The next morning began quietly, but the air inside the house still carried the weight of the night before. The boy woke up early, earlier than usual. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, the memory of flashing lights and raised voices came back like an echo. He sat on the edge of his bed for a long time, staring at the floor. It was strange how something that lasted only minutes could stay in your head for hours. Downstairs, he could hear the sound of the coffee maker and the faint clink of a spoon against a mug. His mother was already awake, dressed neatly as always, her work badge clipped to her jacket. When he walked into the kitchen, she looked up from her laptop. "Morning," she said gently. He nodded. "Morning." She poured him a glass of orange juice and slid it across the counter. "You ready to go with me?" He hesitated. "Yeah, I think so." He still wasn't sure what to expect. She had told him the night before that she wanted him to come to the FBI field office with her, to see what she did every day, to understand how things worked from the inside. But he wasn't sure how he felt about walking into a building full of people in uniform after what had happened. They drove through the city in silence for most of the way. The streets were busy, full of people heading to work, kids waiting for buses, and the smell of fresh bread coming from a bakery on the corner. Everything looked normal, but to him normal felt different now. When they pulled into the parking lot, he looked up at the tall building with its wide glass doors and clean white walls. It looked powerful, almost intimidating. His mother noticed the hesitation in his eyes. "It's okay," she said softly. "Just stay close. You're safe here." Inside, the building buzzed with quiet movement, agents walking by with files in their hands, the faint hum of printers, the sound of phones ringing. Everyone seemed to move with purpose. The boy followed his mother through security, where a guard greeted her by name. They stepped into her office, small but organized, with framed certificates on the wall and a photo of him as a little boy sitting on her desk. She smiled slightly when she saw him glance at it. "I keep that there to remind me what I'm working for," she said. He smiled faintly, sitting down in the chair opposite her. As she started sorting through her paperwork, he looked around. There were photos on the wall of her and her team at different events, training, community programs, even charity work. He hadn't realized how much of her job wasn't just catching criminals. It was about people, about trust. After a while, one of her colleagues knocked on the door. "Morning, Agent Collins," the man said politely. Then his eyes landed on the boy. "Is this your son? The one you mentioned last night?" She nodded. "Yes, this is him." The man smiled kindly and extended a hand. "Good to meet you, young man. Your mom's one of the best around here." The boy shook his hand and gave a small smile. The compliment made him proud, but it also reminded him of what she had to be strong against every single day. When the man left, his mother turned back to her computer, typing quickly. After a few minutes, she stopped and looked at her son. "Do you want to know what I'm writing?" He nodded. "This is part of the report about yesterday," she said. "It's going to Internal Affairs for review." "Will those cops get in trouble?" he asked. "They'll be questioned at least," she said. "What happens after that depends on the investigation." He watched her for a moment, her fingers moving over the keyboard, steady and focused. "You don't look angry," he said quietly. She smiled sadly. "Anger doesn't help me here. Facts do." Her calmness impressed him. If he were her, he'd still be furious. But she handled everything with a balance he didn't understand until now. A little while later, she stood up and motioned for him to follow her. "Come on," she said. "There's something I want you to see." They walked down a long hallway to a training room where several agents were gathered around a large screen. His mother nodded to the instructor and whispered something. The man smiled and stepped aside, letting her speak. "This," she said, turning to her son, "is part of what we teach. It's called situational judgment. It's about how to see a situation clearly, without bias or fear." The screen showed video scenarios where officers had to make decisions in seconds. Who to stop, how to de-escalate, when to ask questions instead of taking action. As the clips played, the boy felt a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, he could see how complicated some situations were. On the other, he couldn't stop thinking about how fast those officers had judged him. His mother watched him quietly. "It's hard to do this job right," she said softly. "But it's harder to live with the mistakes that come from not thinking first." He nodded slowly. "They didn't think at all yesterday." "No," she said. "They reacted, and reactions without reason lead to danger." They stayed in the room for a while, watching more examples, listening to her explain how bias training worked, how every officer and agent had to take it regularly. It made him realize that some people in uniform were trying to do better, but not all succeeded. When they finally left the room, she led him to a small break area and got them both some coffee and juice. They sat by the window overlooking the city. "Do you remember what you said last night?" she asked. "You asked if people will ever stop seeing you that way." He nodded, looking down at his cup. She leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. "The truth is, not everyone will change. Some will hold on to fear and judgment their whole lives, but others will see you, really see you, for who you are, and you have to focus on that." He looked up at her, thoughtful. "So what do I do when they don't see me right?" "Keep being who you are," she said. "You don't let them decide your worth. You show it every day by how you live, how you speak, and how you treat people." He let out a slow breath. "That's not easy." "No," she agreed. "But nothing important ever is." They sat quietly for a while. Then she checked her watch. "We have one more stop before we go home." He raised an eyebrow. Where? You'll see, she said with a small smile. They left the office and drove across town to a community center where a meeting was taking place. The parking lot was full and people were gathered inside talking, some holding signs about justice and equality. It wasn't a protest. It was a discussion, a community meeting led by local leaders and law enforcement officials. As they entered, a few people recognized her. She had spoken here before, working with the community to build trust. When she walked up to the microphone, the room grew quiet. She introduced herself briefly and began to speak. Yesterday, my son was stopped by police officers who assumed he was someone else. It was handled poorly, and it could have ended very differently. I'm here not just as an FBI agent, but as a mother who saw fear in her child's eyes. The room was completely silent. She continued, her voice steady. This isn't about anger or blame. It's about responsibility, about learning, growing, and making sure our next generation doesn't have to live in fear every time they see flashing lights. The boy sat in the audience watching her. Seeing her speak like that filled him with pride. She wasn't just his mom. She was using her position to make a difference. After she finished, people came up to her to thank her, to share their own stories. Some parents even hugged her. The boy saw that what happened to him wasn't just his story. It was something many others could relate to. On the drive home, he stared out the window, thinking about everything he had seen that day. The office, the training, the people at the meeting. He turned to his mother. You're not just trying to fix what happened to me, are you? She smiled faintly. No, I'm trying to fix what keeps happening to all of us. He nodded slowly. I get it now. For the first time since that afternoon, he felt lighter. The fear hadn't disappeared, but it had turned into something else. Understanding, maybe even hope. When they got home, the sun was setting again, painting the sky with soft pink and orange streaks. It felt like the end of one long chapter and the start of another. His mother unlocked the door and turned to him before they went inside. You did well today, she said. You faced something difficult and didn't let it define you. He smiled faintly. I learned from the best. She laughed softly and pulled him into a hug. For the first time since everything began, they both felt peace, not because the world was fixed, but because they had faced it together. The moment she stepped out of her black SUV, everything around the scene seemed to pause for a split second. The sound of traffic, the murmurs from the small crowd, even the police radio chatter, and all of it faded. She didn't rush or yell. She simply walked with steady, deliberate steps toward her son's car. Her presence alone carried a kind of authority that made people stop and stare. She wasn't just another parent rushing to defend their child. There was calm strength in the way she moved, like someone used to facing tense situations. But this was different. This was her son. Jalen, still standing beside his car with his hands visible, noticed her before anyone else. Relief washed over his face, but confusion followed. He didn't know what his mother would do. He just knew she wouldn't let this go quietly. The officers noticed her too. One of them held up his hand as if to stop her. Ma'am, stay back, please, he said sharply, trying to sound in control. But she didn't stop. She didn't raise her voice either. That's my son, she said firmly, taking another step forward. And you need to lower your tone before you say another word to him. The other officer shifted uncomfortably, glancing between her and his partner. He could sense that something wasn't right about the situation. The calmness in her voice wasn't fear. It was confidence, the kind that comes from knowing exactly what you're doing. She reached into her jacket slowly, her movements clear and measured. Before you say anything else, she said, pulling out her badge, I'm Special Agent Collins, FBI. The reaction was instant. Both officers froze, the color draining from their faces. The one who had his hand near his holster moved it away quickly, almost like he'd been caught doing something he shouldn't. The people watching from across the street began murmuring louder, phone still raised. Agent Collins stopped a few feet away from them and held her badge steady so they could see it clearly. Now, she said evenly, explain to me what reason you had for stopping and threatening my son. One of the officers opened his mouth, stammering. Ma'am, Agent Collins, there was a report. She raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. You thought what? That a teenager driving home from practice looked suspicious enough to draw your weapon? The other officer looked down, avoiding her eyes. The tone in her voice wasn't loud, but it cut deep. The kind of tone that didn't need to shout to command respect. The small crowd fell silent again. Everyone wanted to hear what would happen next. Jalen stood quietly, still catching his breath. His mother turned toward him and asked softly, "Are you okay?" He nodded slowly, though his voice was shaky when he tried to answer. "Yeah, I'm fine," he whispered, though the look in his eyes said otherwise. He wasn't fine. Not yet. She reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. Then she faced the officers again. "You pointed your weapon at my child. You accused him of being someone he's not. You didn't even ask his name before treating him like a threat." One of the officers tried again. "Ma'am, with all due respect, there's been a series of car thefts in this area. And your son's car matched my son's car." She interrupted. "You mean a dark-colored sedan? Do you realize how many people drive cars like that? Or did you decide he looked suspicious because of something else?" Neither officer spoke. Their silence said more than any answer could. Agent Collins took out her phone and began recording. Her voice stayed calm, but there was steel behind it. "I need both of your names, badge numbers, and a copy of your incident report." Right now, they hesitated. "Ma'am, right now," she repeated. The officer closest to her shifted nervously before giving his name. The other followed, mumbling his badge number under his breath. She repeated it clearly into her phone, making sure every word was recorded. The crowd began whispering again. Some people nodded approvingly. Others looked shocked at how quickly the power in the situation had shifted. Just minutes ago, those officers were shouting commands. Now they looked like students caught breaking the rules. She turned back to Jalen. "You're getting in my car," she said gently. "Leave your keys there for now. I'll deal with this later." He nodded and walked toward her SUV. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the door. But he felt safer now. Like the world had steadied itself just a little. Once Jalen was seated inside, Agent Collins turned back to the officers one last time. "Let me make something clear," she said. "If you had done your job properly, this wouldn't have happened. You could have asked questions before assuming guilt. You could have handled this with basic respect. Instead, you made a child feel like his life was in danger, and you're lucky I got here when I did." The officer who seemed to be in charge opened his mouth to apologize, but she raised a hand again. "Don't apologize to me. You apologize to him." She pointed toward the car where Jalen sat quietly. The officer looked down, then walked hesitantly to the SUV window. Jalen didn't roll it down at first, unsure what to do. His mother gave him a small nod. He lowered the window halfway. The officer swallowed hard. "I'm sorry, son. We made a mistake." Jalen didn't say anything for a moment. His eyes were fixed on the dashboard. Then in a quiet voice he said, "You scared me." It wasn't said in anger, just truth. The kind of truth that lands heavier than shouting ever could. The officer nodded slightly. "I understand," he said, though it was clear he didn't fully understand. He stepped back, looking ashamed. Agent Collins didn't say another word. She returned to her SUV, got in, and started the engine. The officers watched as she drove away. The crowd began to disperse, though a few people stayed, talking quietly about what they had just witnessed. Some even clapped softly as the black SUV pulled out of the street. Inside the car, silence filled the space between mother and son. Jalen stared out the window, watching the flashing lights fade in the mirror. His breathing was still uneven. His mother reached over and placed her hand gently on his. "You did everything right," she said softly. "You stayed calm. You listened. You survived, Jalen. That's what matters." He nodded but didn't speak. After a while, he said quietly, "They didn't see me, Mom. They saw what they wanted to see." Her grip on his hand tightened. "I know," she said, her voice low but steady. "And that's why we have to make sure this doesn't happen again." When they got home, she called a close friend at the bureau to report what had happened. She didn't raise her voice or sound emotional. She gave every detail clearly, professionally, like she would for any case. But this time it was personal. This time it was about her own child. As she ended the call, Jalen sat on the couch, still quiet. His younger sister peeked from the hallway, confused by the tension in the room. His mother motioned for her to go back to bed. Then she turned to Jalen and sat beside him. "I know this was scary," she said, "but you can't let this make you afraid of the world. You belong in it just like anyone else." Jalen looked at her, searching her face for something. Reassurance, maybe, or understanding. "Do you ever get used to it?" he asked. She sighed, thinking about all the times she had faced something similar while working undercover or out in the field. "No," she said finally. "You never get used to it, but you learn to stand taller because of it." They sat there in silence for a few moments. Outside, the night was quiet again, the same calm that had started the day before everything changed. But something inside both of them had shifted forever. She knew that tomorrow there would be reports to file, phone calls to make, and probably questions from the department about her behavior. But she didn't care. What mattered was that her son was safe, and that the officers who had treated him unfairly would be held accountable. Before going to bed, she checked on Jalen one more time. He was lying awake, staring at the ceiling. "Mom," he said softly, "when you showed them your badge, they changed so fast." She nodded slowly. "People respect what they recognize," she said. "Sometimes they don't respect who they should until they're forced to." He didn't reply, but the meaning stuck with him. That night, as the house fell quiet, Jalen thought about how close things had come to ending differently. He thought about how easily a misunderstanding could turn dangerous, and how his mother's courage had turned it all around. And in that quiet moment, while the world outside went on as usual, a mother's strength had reminded everyone watching that calm authority, truth, and love could still stop fear in its tracks. The next morning began quietly. Sunlight spilled through the curtains, but the house felt heavy. Jalen sat at the kitchen table, still wearing his sweatshirt from the night before. His cereal had gone soggy, untouched. He kept glancing at his phone, scrolling through messages from classmates who had seen the video online. Someone from the crowd had posted it on social media, and overnight it had spread everywhere. There were hundreds of comments. Some people were shocked. Some were angry. Others wrote messages of support. But a few comments stung. People saying things like, "He must have done something," or "The cops were just doing their job." Jalen's chest tightened as he read them. He locked his phone and pushed it face down on the table. His mother walked in quietly, already dressed for work. She had barely slept but looked calm as ever. Years of FBI training had taught her how to keep her emotions tucked away, but this morning it was harder. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat across from her son. "Did you eat anything?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "Not hungry." She looked at him for a moment. "You can't let this stop your life, Jay. You did nothing wrong." "I know," he said softly, "but everyone's talking about it. It's weird. I didn't ask to be in some viral video." She nodded slowly. "No one asks for moments like this. They just happen. But sometimes they can be used for something bigger." He looked up. "Bigger?" "Change," she said simply. "Awareness." "The truth," he sighed. "You really think that happens? People forget about stuff online in a week?" His mother smiled faintly. "That depends on what you do next." Later that day, her phone buzzed constantly. Calls from her office. Calls from the police department. Even local reporters were reaching out asking for comments. She wasn't sure if she wanted to speak publicly yet. This wasn't just a headline, it was her child's life. But deep down, she knew silence would mean nothing changed. By afternoon, she sat in the living room with Jalen beside her, scrolling through the news on TV. A local station was already covering the story. The reporter stood in front of the street where it all happened, describing how an unjustified police stop had sparked community outrage. The footage cut to a short clip of the video. Jalen standing with his hands up. Then the moment his mother stepped out holding her badge, the reporter said, "The situation de-escalated when the teen's mother, an FBI agent, identified herself at the scene. The department has launched an internal review." Jalen turned off the TV. "I don't want to see it anymore," he said quietly. His mother nodded. "Okay, but we can't hide from it either." For the next few days, things moved fast. Reporters wanted interviews. Civil rights groups reached out. The police chief called personally to apologize and asked to meet in person. Jalen didn't want to go. "What's the point?" he asked. "They'll just say sorry because they have to." But his mother said calmly, "Sometimes hearing it face to face matters more than reading it on paper." When they walked into the police station, heads turned. Everyone knew who they were. The chief greeted them in the hallway, trying to smile, but his eyes gave away the nervousness behind it. "Agent Collins, thank you for coming. Jalen, I'm truly sorry for what happened. It should never have reached that point. Jalen looked at the man but didn't answer. His mother spoke instead. Thank you for saying that. But apologies don't erase fear. My son will remember that moment for the rest of his life. The chief nodded, his expression somber. We're taking this very seriously. The officers involved are on leave pending review. We're also arranging additional bias training for the entire department. Jalen finally spoke. Do you think training will actually change how they see people like me? The question hung in the air. The chief didn't have a quick answer. After a pause, he said quietly, I hope so. And I hope you'll help us understand how to do better. When they left the station, Jalen felt lighter somehow. He wasn't sure he believed everything the chief said, but at least they'd been heard. That evening, they sat together on the porch. The air was cool and the street was quiet again. Nothing like that chaotic night. Fireflies blinked softly in the distance. His mother looked out at the road and said, When I joined the bureau, I thought wearing this badge meant protection. That it spoke for me, but yesterday, I saw what happens when someone doesn't have that kind of shield. It's a painful reminder, Jalen nodded. You shouldn't have had to show it for them to treat me right, she smiled sadly. You're right. But sometimes the world still needs to learn what fairness actually looks like. The next week, they agreed to do one interview. Just one. It wasn't for fame or attention. She wanted to use her voice to push for change. Sitting in front of the camera, she spoke with honesty, not anger. My son is a good kid. He followed every rule he was taught. Yet he was treated like a suspect before anyone asked him a single question. This isn't just about my family. It's about all the families who don't have the chance to step in when something like this happens. The interviewer asked Jalen how it felt to see his mother that day. He thought for a moment before answering. I was scared, he said quietly. But when I saw her get out of the car, I felt safe again. It made me realize that standing up doesn't always mean shouting. Sometimes it just means not backing down. The interview spread quickly. People from across the country reached out, sending letters and messages of support. Some parents shared their own stories of unfair treatment. Others simply thanked them for speaking up. But with the attention also came pressure. News outlets kept calling. Commentators debated the story online. Jalen's mother decided to step back from the spotlight after that. We said what needed to be said, she told him. Now it's time for action, not attention. A few months passed. Life slowly returned to normal, though normal now meant something different. The police department began working with community groups to host open conversations. Jalen was invited to one of them. At first he didn't want to go, but his mother encouraged him. You have a voice now, she said. Use it. At the meeting, he sat in a circle with officers, teachers, and students. It felt strange at first, but when his turn came to speak, he didn't hold back. That night, I thought I was going to be another story people talk about for a week and forget, he said. But now I see there's a chance to make sure it doesn't happen to someone else. I just want people to look at us and see a person, not a threat. The room was quiet for a long moment before people began nodding. Even some officers looked moved. It wasn't a perfect fix, but it was a start. Back home that night, his mother hugged him tight. I'm proud of you, she said softly. You turned something painful into something powerful. He smiled for the first time in weeks. Guess I learned that from you. Over time, the noise around the story faded, but its echo stayed. The city implemented new body cam rules. The officers involved never returned to patrol duty. And Jalen's story became part of local training sessions for new recruits. A reminder of what happens when judgment replaces fairness. Months later, as life truly settled again, Jalen and his mother drove past the spot where it all happened. The street looked ordinary now. Cars parked neatly, kids riding bikes, nothing unusual. But to them, it would always be the place where everything changed. Jalen looked out the window quietly, then said, It's weird how one moment can change how you see the world. His mother nodded, eyes still on the road. Moments don't define us, Jay. What we do after them does. He smiled slightly. So what do we do now? She glanced at him and said, We live, we speak, we teach. And we keep reminding people that respect shouldn't depend on who someone is or what badge they carry. The rest of the drive was peaceful. Music played softly from the radio. For the first time in a long while, Jalen felt a kind of calm that didn't come from safety alone. It came from understanding. He knew he couldn't control how others saw him, but he could control how he carried himself, how he told his story. and how he made sure others learned from it. When they reached home, his mother parked the car and turned off the engine. "You know," she said, smiling, "that night could have gone very differently. But maybe, just maybe it happened the way it did so others could see the truth." Jalen nodded slowly, thinking about the fear, the silence, the strength, and the peace that followed. "I think they'll remember," he said quietly. His mother reached over and squeezed his hand. Then it was worth it. The two sat there for a moment before getting out of the car. The evening sky above them glowed orange and pink, the air calm again. The world hadn't changed overnight, but a small part of it had. And that was enough for now. And as they walked inside together, side by side, there was no anger left, just understanding, courage, and a quiet belief that sometimes one act of truth can reach further than fear ever could.